The rain hammered against the flimsy plexiglass of the gas station's convenience store, each icy pellet a tiny fist pounding against my already frayed nerves. It was a sound that mirrored the frantic, desperate pulse in my own veins, a violent percussion accompanying the symphony of my life falling apart. Outside, the world was a smear of neon and black water, the night dissolved into a cold, indifferent soup. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of stale coffee and cherry air freshener, a nauseating combination that clung to the back of my throat. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Mark, had pulled our car up to pump 3 with a screech of worn brake pads. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw a hard, unforgiving line of bone. The silence in the car for the last 100 miles had been heavier than any argument, a dead weight of unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. "Go get some water and chips," he'd clipped out, not looking at me. His eyes, once warm and familiar, were now just polished stones, reflecting nothing back. I'd hesitated. A cold dread, sharp and specific, had coiled in my gut. It was the same feeling I'd had for weeks, a psychologist's intuition, screaming that the man I had once promised my life to was no longer just unhappy, he was unraveling. The rapid weight loss, the frantic whispered phone calls, the way he'd flinch if I entered a room too quietly, they were all data points, plotting a terrifying trajectory. But I went. I slid out of the car, the wind snatching the door from my hand and slamming it shut. I didn't take my purse. I didn't take my phone. Why would I? It was just water and chips. I walked through the automatic doors, the synthetic chime announcing my arrival to the bored-looking teenager behind the counter. I remember the exact moment I turned. A bag of salt and vinegar chips in my hand. Through the water-streaked window, I saw the red taillights of our sedan flare to life. For a frozen second, my brain refused to process the image. He was just moving the car closer, out of the rain. Then the car lurched backward, tires squealing on the slick asphalt. It swung around in a brutal arc and accelerated, its engine a desperate roar that tore through the drumming of the rain. It sped past the glowing sign for the interstate and vanished into the black, watery void. He was gone. The bag of chips slipped from my numb fingers, scattering across the grimy linoleum. The teenager looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to mild curiosity. "Hey, you okay?" I couldn't answer. My breath was trapped in my chest, a shard of ice. He left me, in the middle of nowhere, in a storm, with no money, no phone, no identification. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was an act of such profound cruelty, such deliberate abandonment, that it felt like a physical assault. My analytical mind, the part of me that could usually compartmentalize and diagnose, was utterly silent. There was only a hollow, ringing shock. I stumbled back outside, the cold rain instantly soaking my thin sweater, plastering my hair to my scalp. I stood under the flickering fluorescent lights of the station's awning, a lone, pathetic figure staring down the empty, rain-lashed highway. Panic was beginning to bubble up, hot and acidic. I had no one to call, nowhere to go. My sister, Chloe, was hours away at her university. My parents were long gone, casualties of a car accident a decade ago that had left me the sole guardian of my own fractured life. Headlights cut through the downpour, growing brighter as they approached. They didn't belong to a semi-truck or a family minivan. They were the predatory, ice-white glare of a high-end luxury vehicle. A long black sedan, polished to a mirror finish that seemed to repel the rain, slid to a silent stop directly in front of me. It was so out of place in this desolate landscape that it felt like a hallucination, a phantom conjured from the storm. The back door opened. A man unfolded himself from the interior, emerging with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and deeply unnerving. He was tall, impossibly so, and clad in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it looked like a second skin. He didn't carry an umbrella, but the rain seemed hesitant to touch him, the drops sliding off the expensive wool of his shoulders. His face was a masterpiece of harsh, beautiful angles, a strong jaw, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had never known a smile. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were the color of dark-aged whiskey, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. He took a step closer, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. He stopped a few feet away, a titan of shadow and power in the sickly yellow light. "Dr. Elena Hayes," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, a gravelly hum that vibrated through the air and settled deep in my bones. It was the calmest sound in the storm and the most terrifying. My heart seized. He knew my name. The panic I'd been holding at bay erupted, a cold fire spreading through my limbs. This wasn't a random rescuer. This was something else. This was the why. The reason for Mark's frantic behavior, the whispered calls, the final desperate act of abandonment. He hadn't just left me. He had delivered me. "Who are you?" My voice was a thin, reedy whisper, almost stolen by the wind. The man's expression didn't change, but his gaze swept over me, a clinical assessment that took in my soaked clothes, my shivering form, my wide, terrified eyes. "My name is Dante Moretti," he said, as if it should mean something to me. "Your husband has made a series of very poor decisions, the consequences of which have now fallen to you." He gestured to the open door of the car. "You're in considerable danger. You will come with me." It was a command, not an offer. Every instinct I possessed, both as a woman and as a psychologist who studied human behavior, screamed at me to run. But where? Into the storm? Down the dark, empty highway? I was a specimen pinned to a board, and he was the collector. His stillness was more menacing than any overt threat. It was the absolute confidence of a predator that knows its prey has no escape. My carefully constructed world had been shattered in a matter of minutes, and this man, this dark, imposing stranger, was standing in the wreckage, holding the only door out. A door that I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the soul, led to a cage. With a shuddering breath that felt like a surrender, I took a step toward the car. The interior of the sedan was another world. The chaos of the storm was instantly muted, replaced by an unnerving, tomb-like silence. The scent wasn't of leather and polish, but of something cleaner, more sterile, with a faint, metallic tang I couldn't place. It smelled of power. I sank into the plush seat, my wet clothes a desecration against the pristine upholstery. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing me inside. Across from me, Dante Moretti settled back into his seat, his large frame consuming the space without seeming cramped. He was an exercise in controlled force, his stillness a coiled spring. A partition of dark-tinted glass separated us from the driver, whose form was just a silhouette. As the car pulled away from the gas station, leaving that small, pathetic island of light behind, I felt a profound and irreversible sense of dislocation. I was no longer Elena Hayes, clinical psychologist, a woman dealing with a messy divorce. I was cargo. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. My professional training was kicking in, a desperate defense mechanism. Observe. Analyze. Do not show fear. Fear is a currency, and I couldn't afford to spend it. Dante's whiskey-colored eyes were on me, his gaze unwavering. Somewhere safe. Hookah. Safe from what? From whom? All relevant questions, he acknowledged, his voice a low murmur. He steepled his long fingers, the cuffs of his stark white shirt peeking out from his suit jacket. On his wrist was a watch, a complex piece of machinery with a dark face and gleaming silver hands. It didn't just tell time. It measured it, controlled it. But they are questions for later. For now, you need to be warm and dry. He spoke with an unnerving finality, a calm authority that brooked no argument. He wasn't my captor in the traditional sense. He wasn't shouting or brandishing a weapon. He was simply stating facts as he saw them. and the primary fact was that my life was now his to manage. I watched his face searching for a crack in the stoic facade. His features were perfectly symmetrical, almost inhumanly so, but there was a faint tension around his mouth, a subtle tightening of the muscles in his jaw. He wasn't as impassive as he appeared. He was holding something back, a great weight of information and intent. The car moved through the city with silent efficiency, a shark gliding through murky water. We passed familiar streets, but they looked alien through the tinted glass. The city I knew, my city, was out there, but I was no longer part of it. I was in a bubble, a mobile prison cell with this dark, enigmatic man. We finally turned into a private underground garage, the steel gate rolling shut behind us with a deafening clang. It echoed the sound of a cell door locking. The driver, a man built like a brick wall with a face of carved granite, got out and opened Dante's door. He then opened mine. His eyes, small and dark, met mine for a fraction of a second, completely devoid of expression. "This is Marco," Dante said, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. "He is my head of security. His only concern is my safety, which, by extension, now includes yours. You will do exactly as he says at all times." Marco said nothing. He simply stood, a sentinel of silent obedience. Dante led me to a private elevator. The doors slid open to reveal a cab lined in dark wood and polished chrome. He pressed a single unmarked button. There was no lurch, just a smooth, silent ascent that made my ears pop. I felt a growing sense of claustrophobia, the gilded cage solidifying around me. The elevator doors opened directly into a living space. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an apartment. It was a kingdom in the sky. A two-story wall of glass revealed a panoramic, God's-eye view of the entire city, its lights glittering like a carpet of scattered diamonds below. The storm had passed, leaving the night air crystalline and sharp. The space was vast, minimalist, and decorated in shades of charcoal, slate, and cream. A massive, low-slung sofa faced the window. A grand piano, black and gleaming, stood in one corner. There was no clutter, no personal photographs, no sign of a life lived. It was as beautiful, sterile, and intimidating as the man beside me. "Your room is upstairs," he said, his voice pulling me from my daze. "There are clothes for you, a bathroom. Anything you need, you will ask for." "I need my phone," I said, the words sharp. "I need to call my sister." He turned to face me fully, the city lights creating a harsh halo around his dark hair. "Your phone is a liability, as is your laptop, your credit cards, anything that can be tracked. They are being taken care of." "Taken care of?" I repeated, disbelief warring with fear. "You can't just take my things. I have a life, a sister who will be worried sick when she can't reach me." "Your sister, Chloe," he stated, and the casual way he said her name sent another jolt of ice through me. "Studying art history at Northgate University. Lives in the Aspen Hall dormitory, room 314. She has a part-time job at the campus library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her best friend is named Jessica Riley." The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't just my name. He knew everything. He had studied me. The psychologist in my head, the one who had been dormant, suddenly woke up screaming. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't an interception. This was a calculated acquisition. "You've been watching me," I whispered, the accusation hanging in the sterile air between us. A flicker of something, not surprise, perhaps acknowledgement, passed through his eyes. "Vigilance is a necessity in my world, Dr. Hayes. I do not leave things to chance." He gestured toward a sweeping, modern staircase. "Go, get changed. We will talk after." His dismissal was absolute. Defeated for the moment, I turned and walked toward the stairs, every nerve ending screaming. I could feel his eyes on my back, a palpable weight, an owner's gaze. As I ascended the cold, floating steps, I understood. This opulent penthouse wasn't a sanctuary. It was a perfectly designed cage, and he had been waiting for the right moment to put me in it. The room he'd indicated was as vast and impersonal as the living area below. A king-sized bed with a severe dark wood frame was covered in a simple white duvet. The closet doors were open, revealing a wardrobe of new clothes in neutral shades, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers. All in my size. The chilling thoroughness of it was a violation more profound than any lock and key. In the adjoining bathroom, a marble monolith of a room, toiletries were laid out, expensive brands I'd only ever seen in magazines. He had curated a life for me here, erasing my old one with a swipe of a credit card. I stripped off my damp, grimy clothes, leaving them in a pathetic heap on the floor. The hot water of the shower was a shock, a sensory blast that brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't relief I felt, but a deeper, more insidious fear. The comfort was part of the trap. The luxury was the velvet lining of the cage. He was disorienting me, sedating me with wealth while he tightened his grip. Dressed in a pair of soft gray trousers and a cream-colored sweater that felt like a cloud against my skin, I felt like an imposter. These weren't my clothes. This wasn't my life. I walked back to the top of the staircase and hesitated, listening. The penthouse was silent. I descended slowly, my bare feet cold on the polished wood. Dante was standing by the wall of windows, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He hadn't changed, his dark suit still impeccable. He looked like a king surveying his domain. He turned as I approached, his eyes scanning me from head to toe, an assessing glance that made me feel like a new acquisition, being inspected for flaws. "Better," he stated simply. He gestured to the sofa. "Sit." I remained standing. "I'm not one of your employees, Mr. Moretti, and I'm not a child. I want answers. Now. Who are you? Why do you know so much about me? And what does my ex-husband have to do with any of this?" My defiance seemed to amuse him. A faint, almost imperceptible lift at the corner of his mouth was the only sign. "You have fire," he observed, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Good, you'll need it." He moved away from the window and sat in a large armchair opposite the sofa, the picture of relaxed authority. As for who I am, let's just say I am in the business of asset management, and your husband Mark made himself my business when he accrued a debt he could not pay. My blood ran cold. "A debt? To you?" "No, not to me," he said, his voice dropping, losing its detached quality and taking on a harder edge. "To a man named Victor Volkov, a man with no honor and a taste for brutality. Mark owed him a great deal of money. Money he lost, I believe, betting on things he didn't understand." Victor Volkov. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Dante said it, with a quiet, venomous disdain, told me everything I needed to know. "Mark doesn't have that kind of money," I said, my mind racing. We're not wealthy people." "Victor was aware of that," Dante said. He leaned forward, placing his glass on the low table between us. The clink of glass on stone was unnaturally loud in the silence. When the cash was not forthcoming, Volkov offered him an alternative method of payment. He paused, his whiskey-colored eyes locking onto mine, holding me pinned. "You, Dr. Hayes," he offered them you. The world tilted. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It couldn't be true. Mark, for all his faults, for all the misery of our dying marriage, he couldn't. But he could. The frantic energy, the terror in his eyes, the way he couldn't look at me. He wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid of what he was about to do to me. The gas station wasn't an abandonment. It was a transaction, a drop point. He had sold me. A wave of nausea washed over me, so strong I had to grip the back of the sofa to stay upright. My entire marriage, my entire life with him, became a lie, a grotesque prelude to this single monstrous act of betrayal. "Why?" I choked out, the word tearing at my throat. "Why me?" Volkov has a particular appreciation for things he cannot have. You are intelligent, beautiful, and until recently, belonged to another man. To him, you are a prize, a trophy to be displayed. Dante's voice was flat, clinical, as if he were discussing a piece of art at auction. The plan was for Mark to leave you at that gas station. Volkov's men were 5 minutes behind me. They would have taken you, and you would have disappeared into his world, a world from which there is no escape. I sank onto the sofa, my legs no longer able to support me. My mind, my greatest tool, was a maelstrom of horror and disbelief. I tried to process it, to fit the pieces together, but the picture they formed was too hideous to look at. "So you intercepted?" I asked, looking at the formidable man before me. "Why? What do you care about some stranger being sold to a monster?" Dante picked up his glass again, swirling the contents. The light caught the liquid, making it glow like molten gold. "Viktor Volkov and I are competitors. His expansion is my problem. His assets are, potentially, my assets. But more than that," he said, and for the first time his voice held a trace of something other than cold control, a flicker of raw, personal animosity. "I have a standing policy regarding men who treat women as property. I do not tolerate it." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the image of a ruthless crime lord with this strange, almost noble declaration. A dark protector, a handsome, dangerous man operating by a strict personal code. The archetypes from my psychology textbooks were coming to life in front of me, breathing and bleeding in this sterile, luxurious prison. "So what now?" I whispered. "What happens to me?" He set the glass down again, his movements precise and deliberate. "Now you are here. Here you are safe. Volkov cannot touch you, but you will remain here. You will not contact anyone. You will not attempt to leave. You will do exactly as I say. You are under my protection, Doctor." "And what I protect," he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl that vibrated through the floor, "I keep." The words hung in the air. A declaration of ownership as binding as any contract. He had saved me from one monster only to claim me for himself. I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, moved from one square on the board to another. But as I looked into Dante Moretti's unyielding eyes, I knew one thing for certain. This square, this gilded cage, was infinitely more dangerous. The days that followed bled into one another, a seamless stretch of anxious monotony. My life became circumscribed by the 4 glass walls of the penthouse. It was a strange, disorienting existence, suspended high above a city I could see but not touch. I was a ghost haunting a pristine, uninhabited museum. Dante was a spectral presence. He would be gone for long stretches, disappearing before I woke and returning late at night. When he was home, the vast apartment seemed to shrink, the air crackling with his contained energy. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, a panther pacing the confines of his territory, and I was the strange, new creature introduced into his enclosure. I spent my time observing him, my psychologist's mind clinging to the familiar habit of analysis as a lifeline. It was the only power I had left. I catalogued his habits, the way he always loosened his tie with a single, sharp tug the moment he walked in, the fact that he only ever drank one type of whiskey, always neat, the way his left hand would often rest on the small of his back, a subtle indication of a past injury or chronic pain. His control was absolute, a fortress he had built around himself. His face was a mask of stoic indifference, but I learned to read the micro-expressions he couldn't completely suppress. A fractional narrowing of his eyes when he was displeased, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw when he was under stress, a faint, almost invisible muscle twitch below his eye when he was containing a surge of anger. These were the cracks in the marble, and I studied them obsessively, trying to map the man beneath the monolith. He, in turn, watched me. His gaze was a constant, unnerving pressure. Whether I was reading one of the books that had appeared on the shelves, histories, classic literature, poetry, a collection I suspected was chosen specifically for me, or simply staring out at the cityscape, I could feel his eyes on me. It wasn't a lecherous gaze. It was something far more unsettling. It was analytical. He was studying me as I was studying him, a silent mutual assessment. "You're a psychologist," he stated one evening. It was not a question. He was sitting in his usual armchair, a thick file resting on his lap. The file had my name on it. "I am," I replied, my voice tight. The sight of that dossier, a tangible symbol of his intrusion into my life, sent a fresh wave of violation through me. "Your dissertation was on the psychological impact of trauma on moral decision-making," he continued, his eyes not leaving my face. "You argued that extreme stress doesn't build character, it reveals it." I froze. He hadn't just done a background check. He had read my dissertation, a document I had poured years of my life into, a piece of my own mind, and he held it in his hands like an instruction manual. "It seems you know more about me than I know about myself," I said, the words laced with an irony that felt like acid on my tongue. "I make it my business to understand the assets under my protection," he replied coolly, closing the file. The sound was definitive, a judge's gavel falling. "What did your research tell you about men like me, Dr. Hayes?" The question was a test, a probe into my own analytical depths. He was asking me to profile him to his face. I took a slow breath, choosing my words with surgical precision. "My research wasn't about men like you, Mr. Moretti. It was about how ordinary people react when their worlds are shattered. But if I were to form a professional opinion," I paused, holding his gaze, "I would say you exhibit classic traits of a high-functioning sociopath, but that would be a lazy diagnosis. The control is too rigid. The personal code, however violent, is too strict. It suggests a formative trauma, a catastrophic event that necessitated the construction of an impenetrable emotional fortress. Your control isn't a symptom of a lack of feeling. It's a cage built to contain an excess of it. You're not afraid of what others might do to you. You're afraid of what you might do if you ever lost control." The silence that followed was absolute. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. I had taken his challenge and thrown it back at him, using my own training as a weapon. For a long, tense moment, he simply stared at me, his face an unreadable mask. I saw the muscle twitch below his eye. A direct hit. Then, to my astonishment, the corner of his mouth lifted in that ghost of a smile again, this time more defined. "Your husband was a fool," he said, his voice a low rumble, "to have access to a mind like yours and value it so little." The unexpected compliment, if it could be called that, threw me off balance. It was a subtle shift in our dynamic. He wasn't just my keeper anymore. He was, in some strange way, my intellectual sparring partner. The days turned into a week, then two. A fragile, bizarre routine began to form. In the evenings we would sometimes talk. He would ask me questions about my work, about psychology, about the mechanics of the human mind, with a genuine, rapacious curiosity. I, in turn, would carefully probe him about his world, not about the violence, but about the structure, the rules, the codes of honor. He answered in clipped, concise sentences, giving away only what he chose to. It was a high-stakes chess match, played with words. The threat of Viktor Volkov remained a constant, unspoken presence. Marco was a silent shadow, always near, but never intrusive. He would appear at the edge of my vision when I wandered too close to the elevator, a quiet reminder of my confinement. The penthouse was my entire world, a luxurious panoramic prison. I yearned for the simple act of walking down a street, of feeling the sun on my face without a pane of glass in the way. The isolation was beginning to wear on me. My primary concern, the one that gnawed at me day and night, was my sister. "I need to talk to Chloe," I said one night, my voice raw with a desperation I could no longer hide. "Dante, please. She'll think I'm dead. She'll be frantic." He had been staring out the window, his back to me. He turned slowly. A call is a risk. You can listen to every word, I pleaded. You can have Marco stand right there. But I have to let her know I'm alive. The not knowing will destroy her. I know it will. I was the only family she had. The thought of her grief, her fear, was a physical pain in my chest. He studied my face for a long time, his expression unreadable. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to understanding. "One call," he said finally, his voice firm. "On a secured line. You will tell her you are on an unexpected retreat, that you needed to get away after the separation from Mark, that your phone is broken and you have limited access to communication. You will not mention me, this place, or anything that has happened. Do you understand?" Tears of relief pricked my eyes. "Yes, I understand. Thank you." He gave a curt nod and retrieved a sleek, featureless black phone from a drawer. He dialed a number and handed it to me. Marco materialized silently at my side as the phone began to ring. Chloe's voice, when she answered, was a frantic cascade of worry. "Elena? Oh my God! Elena, where have you been? I've been calling and texting. I was about to file a missing persons report." "I'm so sorry, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm okay. I'm safe." I recited the lies Dante had given me, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It felt like a betrayal, but it was a necessary one. Her relief was so palpable, it was almost a sob. "Oh, Lainey, you scared me. I'm glad you're okay. I was so worried." We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted and strange, under the watchful eyes of Dante and Marco. I asked her about her classes, her friends. "Things are good," she said, her voice brightening. "Actually, they're really good. I met someone." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Oh? Who is he?" "His name is Leo," she gushed. "He's amazing, Lainey. He's a little older, a grad student, so smart and funny, and he really gets me." I tried to feel happy for her, but an inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. It was too fast, too new. In my current state of paranoia, everything felt like a potential threat. "That's wonderful, Chloe. Just be careful, okay?" "I'm always careful," she laughed, the sound innocent and carefree. It was a sound from a world I no longer belonged to. After I hung up, the silence in the room was deafening. Dante took the phone from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. The brief contact sent a jolt through me, a spark of warmth in the cold, sterile environment. "Thank you," I said again, my voice soft. He simply nodded, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment longer than necessary. In that moment, the lines blurred. He wasn't just my captor or my protector. He was the man who had shown me a sliver of kindness, the only person in the world who knew the full truth of my situation. A dangerous, terrifying attachment was beginning to form, a fragile root taking hold in the barren soil of my confinement. I was starting to trust him, and my psychologist's mind screamed that this, more than anything else, was the most dangerous development of all. The call to Chloe eased the most acute of my anxieties, but it was replaced by a low-grade simmering dread. The name Leo echoed in my mind. A new boyfriend appearing in my sister's life at the exact moment I was forcibly disappeared felt like too much of a coincidence. My analytical brain, starved for data, latched onto it, turning it over and over. I was becoming paranoid, seeing shadows in every corner, or perhaps I was simply learning to see the world as Dante did. The fragile truce between us deepened. The evenings became a ritual. We would sit in the cavernous living room, the city lights a silent, glittering audience, and we would talk. I told him about my parents, about the crushing weight of responsibility that had fallen on me after their death, about my decision to study psychology to understand the grief that had hollowed out my childhood. He listened, his focus absolute, his whiskey-colored eyes never leaving my face. He was a collector of information, of secrets, and I found myself willingly giving them to him. In return, he offered slivers of his own story, tiny, jagged pieces of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. He spoke of his father, a man of uncompromising principles, and of the family business he had inherited. He never used words like mafia or crime, but the euphemisms were a thin veil over a brutal reality. One night his control slipped. He was staring into the fire he'd had Marco build in the large modern fireplace, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. "My mother loved the piano," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the crackle of the logs. He gestured to the gleaming black grand in the corner. It was hers. She said it was the only thing in the house that told the truth. "What happened to her?" I asked gently. He was silent for a long time. "There was an incident, a business disagreement. A message was sent." He turned from the fire to look at me, and for the first time I saw raw, unguarded pain in his eyes, a deep, ancient wound that had never healed. "They targeted her to get to my father. She was caught in the crossfire. I was 16. The confession hung in the air between us, a shocking moment of vulnerability. The impenetrable fortress had a crack, and it was a wound in the shape of his mother. I finally understood the source of his rigid code, his violent intolerance for men who used women as pawns. He was fighting the ghost of a battle he had lost as a boy. "I'm so sorry, Dante," I whispered. He gave a sharp, dismissive shake of his head, the mask of control snapping back into place. "It was a long time ago. But the revelation changed something fundamental between us. He was no longer just a monster or a protector. He was a man, haunted and broken in his own way. My empathy, the core of my professional identity, latched onto that pain. I started to see past the gilded bars of my cage to the lonely man who had built it. He began to grant me small freedoms. I was allowed access to a tablet, one heavily firewalled and monitored by Marco, but it gave me a window to the outside world. I read the news, followed academic journals, anything to keep my mind sharp. He even brought me a stack of case files one evening, heavily redacted, and asked for my professional opinion on the motivations of the individuals involved. I was a consultant for the criminal underworld, a bizarre and terrifying role that I nonetheless threw myself into. It was a purpose. It was a way to feel useful, to feel like myself again. One afternoon he came home early. I was curled on the sofa reading. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching me. He was holding a small velvet box. "I have something for you," he said, his voice neutral. He walked over and handed it to me. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a delicate white gold necklace. A single perfect pearl hung from the chain. It was simple, elegant, and breathtakingly beautiful. It was the antithesis of his world, quiet, pure, understated. "I can't accept this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It is not a gift," he corrected me, his gaze intense. "It is a symbol. While you are under my protection, you are part of my world. You will wear it." He reached out, his fingers brushing the side of my neck as he took the necklace. The touch was electric, a searing brand on my skin. He fastened the clasp, his knuckles grazing my nape. The pearl came to rest in the hollow of my throat, cool against my skin. "There. Now it's where it belongs." His words, his touch, the possessive claim, it should have terrified me. And it did. But underneath the fear was a confusing, exhilarating flutter. A dangerous, unwilling part of me wanted to belong to him. The tentative peace was shattered a week later. The secure tablet Dante had given me chimed with an incoming video call. It was Chloe. Her face filled the screen, pale and tear-streaked, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored what I had felt at the gas station. "Lainey," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Lainey, you have to help me." "Chloe, what is it? What's wrong?" Panic clawed at my throat. "It's Leo," she cried. He's not who I thought he was. We had a fight, and he got crazy. He locked me in his apartment. He took my phone. I'm using his laptop. He said he knows you. He said you're with some dangerous man and that his boss wants to talk to you." The blood drained from my face. My worst fears, the paranoid whispers in my mind, had just become a screaming reality. Leo. Viktor Volkov. It was a trap. It had always been a trap. Dante, who had been in his office, appeared at my side in an instant, drawn by the panic in my voice. He looked at the screen at my terrified sister, and his face became a mask of cold, lethal fury. "Where is he now?" Dante's voice was low and deadly. "He went out," Chloe sobbed. "But he's coming back soon. He said his boss, Victor, is coming." "Oh God, Lainey, what's happening?" Dante took the tablet from my shaking hands. He looked from Chloe's terrified face to mine, and in that moment I saw it. I saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes, the subtle shift as he processed this new variable. He wasn't just seeing my sister in danger. He was seeing a strategic move on the board by his enemy. "She's at 417 West Elm Street, apartment 6B, Dante said to Marco, who had appeared as if from thin air. Full tactical response. Now. I stared at Dante, a horrifying realization dawning on me. "You knew," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "This Leo. You knew he was a threat." Dante's jaw tightened. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I had my suspicions. We were monitoring him." "Suspicions?" My voice rose, shaking with a rage so profound it eclipsed my fear. "You were monitoring him? You knew my sister was getting involved with a man connected to Volkov, and you didn't tell me? You let her walk into a trap?" "It was a developing situation," he said, his voice clipped and defensive. "Telling you would have served no purpose other than to cause you distress. I had it under control." "Under control?" I shrieked, the sound raw and wounded. "He has her. He has my sister. She wasn't a developing situation, Dante. She's a person, my sister, the only family I have left. And you used her. You used her as bait to get to Volkov." The accusation, bald and hideous, hung between us. His silence was the only confirmation I needed. The fragile trust I had built, the tentative attachment I had felt, it all turned to ash in my mouth. He hadn't seen a young woman falling for a dangerous man. He had seen a pawn, a piece to be maneuvered in his bloody game. The kindness, the shared vulnerabilities, the pearl necklace resting against my skin, it was all a lie. A calculated strategy to ensure my compliance. I looked at him, at this man I had started to believe was my protector, and all I saw was a monster, a colder, more calculating monster than the one he was supposedly saving me from. He had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, weaponizing the one person I loved most in the world. "Get away from me," I spat, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. I backed away from him, my hand instinctively going to my throat and ripping the necklace off. The delicate chain snapped. I threw it at him. It clattered against the marble floor at his feet, the perfect pearl rolling away into the shadows. "You don't protect what's yours, Dante. You just collect it." He flinched as if I had struck him. For the first time since I'd met him, his mask of control completely shattered. I saw a flash of raw, genuine hurt in his eyes, followed by a wave of self-recrimination. But it was too late. The damage was done. The gilded cage had become a torture chamber, and he was no longer my keeper. He was my enemy. The moments after my outburst were a vortex of suffocating silence. Dante stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the spot where the pearl necklace had fallen. The mask was gone, and in its place was the face of the 16-year-old boy who had failed to protect his mother. I saw it then, the deep, echoing terror of history repeating itself. He had tried to control the situation with Chloe to prevent another failure, another loss on his watch. But in his obsession with control, he had engineered the very disaster he sought to avoid. My rage, white-hot and absolute, gave way to a cold, terrifying clarity. I couldn't rely on him. His motives were compromised, his methods tainted by his own ghosts. He saw Chloe as a strategic asset, a queen on a chessboard to be sacrificed for the king. I saw my sister, my responsibility. While Dante was reeling from my accusation, his focus momentarily fractured. My mind went into overdrive. My professional life had been about empowering the vulnerable, giving them the tools to save themselves. Now, I had to be my own therapist, my own savior. He had locked me in this tower, but he had also given me an education in his world. I had listened. I had learned. I retreated to my room, the one that had felt like a prison cell, and now felt like the only defensible space I had. I locked the door, a futile gesture in a house where Dante was omnipotent, but it was a symbolic act, an assertion of a boundary he had so brutally violated. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and resolve. I had to get to Chloe. My mind raced through every conversation, every piece of information I had gleaned over the past weeks. Dante's obsession with control was his greatest strength and his most profound weakness. He would have protocols, contingencies, but he would expect me to be a hysterical, grieving victim. He would not expect me to be a strategist. Then I remembered the journalist, an old friend from my undergraduate days, Sarah Jenkins. We had been close once, a friendship forged in late-night study sessions and cheap coffee. She was ambitious, tenacious, and now worked as an investigative reporter for a major city newspaper. She specialized in exposing the dark underbelly of the city's elite. She would see this as the story of a lifetime. A damsel in distress, a helpless sister, a shadowy Mafia kingpin. The narrative was perfect. She could help. She could get the police involved in a way that Dante, with his extra-legal methods, never could. Public exposure was a weapon he couldn't control. It was a reckless, desperate gamble. Dante had warned me that all my old contacts were liabilities, but my faith in him was incinerated. I had to trust someone, and Sarah was the only person I could think of. The problem was communication. My tablet was a direct feed to Dante's security. My old phone was gone. But a few days ago, while exploring the vast, sterile room, I had found something. Tucked away in the pocket of a winter coat in the back of the closet, a coat I assumed was left by a previous guest, or perhaps a careless maid, was a cheap, disposable burner phone. It was a ghost of a life before mine here. I had checked it. The battery was dead, but the SIM card was still inside. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I found a charger for the tablet that, with a bit of force, fit the burner's port. My hands shook as I plugged it in. I huddled in the closet, hidden among the soulless, scentless clothes, and waited. An hour passed. 2. The silence from downstairs was unnerving. Dante was giving me space, likely assuming I was collapsing under the weight of my grief and fury. He was underestimating me. Finally, a faint red light flickered on the phone. It was charging. I waited another agonizing 30 minutes before powering it on. It came to life with a cheap, tinny chime. 4 bars of service. My heart leaped. I didn't have Sarah's number memorized, but I knew her professional website. I typed the address into the phone's rudimentary browser with trembling fingers. Her contact information was there. I took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, it's me. It's Elena Hayes. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Laney? My God, where are you? People have been looking for you. Your ex-husband is missing. Your sister has been going out of her mind. I don't have time to explain. I cut her off, my voice a harsh whisper. I'm in trouble, Sarah, deep trouble, and they have my sister. I gave her the barest, most frantic version of the story. I was being held by a powerful, dangerous man. My sister, Chloe, had been taken by his rival as leverage. I gave her the address Dante had rattled off, 417 West Elm, apartment 6B. The police won't listen to me, I lied, knowing that involving Dante's name officially would be a death sentence. They'll think it's a domestic dispute, a runaway sister. But you can make them listen. You can get a camera crew there, put a spotlight on that building. If they know the world is watching, they won't be able to just make her disappear." "Oh, Jesus, Laney," Sarah breathed, the professional excitement clear in her voice even through the phone. Okay, I can do this. 4-17 West Elm. Don't worry. I'll get my team there. We'll get her out." "Thank you, Sarah," I sobbed, a wave of desperate relief washing over me. "Thank you." I hung up and slumped against the wall, the phone clattering to the floor. I had done it. I had taken action. I had set something in motion that Dante couldn't control. The relief lasted for approximately 10 minutes. The door to my room burst open, splintering the lock. Dante stood there, his face a thundercloud of absolute fury. He held my snapped pearl necklace in his closed fist. Marco was right behind him, his face grim. "What did you do?" Dante's voice was a low, deadly snarl. He strode into the room, his eyes scanning for the source of my betrayal. They landed on the burner phone on the floor. He snatched it up, his thumb flying across the screen, pulling up the call log. He saw Sarah's name. The color drained from his face, replaced by a look of pure, cold horror. He looked at me, and his expression was one of utter devastation. "No," he whispered. "Elena, what have you done?" "I did what you wouldn't," I shot back, scrambling to my feet. "I got help. Real help. Not from someone who sees my sister as a chess piece." "Help?" He let out a harsh, bitter laugh that held no humor. "You didn't call for help. You just signed her death warrant." He held up the phone. "Sarah Jenkins. We've had a file on her for 6 months. She's not a journalist, Elena. She's an informant. She's on Viktor Volkov's payroll." The world stopped. The air turned to ice in my lungs. No, it wasn't possible. "You're lying," I choked out, but I knew he wasn't. The cold certainty in his eyes was undeniable. The perfect narrative, the ambitious journalist, it had all been a lie. Volkov hadn't just put a man in my sister's life. He had a plant in the media, waiting for someone desperate, waiting for me. I hadn't been a strategist. I had been the biggest fool of all, a puppet dancing on strings I couldn't even see. My one desperate act of agency had been the final move in Volkov's trap. I hadn't saved Chloe. I had just told her captors that no one was coming for them. She was Volkov's contingency, Dante explained, his voice flat and dead, the fury replaced by a grim, urgent finality. "If I took you, he knew you'd be isolated. He predicted you might reach out to an old friend. He's been cultivating Jenkins for months, waiting for this exact scenario." He looked at Marco. "He's moving her. Jenkins will have told him we know the location. He's taking her somewhere secure, a black site. Ofikcha." The weight of my mistake crashed down on me, a physical force that buckled my knees. I sank to the floor, a strangled sob tearing from my throat. I had done this. My arrogance, my belief that I could outthink these monsters, had led Chloe from a cage to a slaughterhouse. Dante knelt in front of me, grabbing my shoulders. His grip was hard, bruising, but his eyes held a desperate intensity, not anger. "Listen to me," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. "There is no time for this. There is no time for grief. You will pull yourself together. I will get her back. But I need you. I need your mind. Not the panicked, reckless part, the analytical part, the part that sees patterns, the part that read my entire history in my face. I need that, Elena, right now." His words cut through the fog of my despair. He wasn't blaming me. He was reallying with me. In our shared moment of catastrophic failure, we were forced back together, not by trust, but by sheer brutal necessity. I looked up at him, my vision blurred by tears. "How?" I whispered. "He could be taking her anywhere." "No," Dante said, his focus becoming razor-sharp. "Men like Volkov are creatures of habit and ego. He has patterns, he has weaknesses. I have files on every move he's made for the last 10 years. But I'm too close to it. My hatred for him clouds my judgment." He pulled me to my feet. "You are going to look at my enemy, and you are going to tell me where he is. You are going to profile the man who has your sister, and you are going to help me tear his world apart. He was giving me a new role, not victim, not prisoner, not pawn, partner. My fear was still a screaming abyss inside me, but a new feeling rose to meet it, a cold, hard resolve. I had made this mess. I would be part of the solution. My naivety was dead, burned away by my catastrophic mistake. What was left was something harder, something colder, something that was beginning to look a lot like him. "Show me the files," I said, my voice devoid of the tremor that had plagued it for weeks. "Show me everything." The penthouse transformed from a gilded cage into a war room. Marco, moving with silent, brutal efficiency, turned the large glass dining table into a command center. Laptops appeared displaying satellite maps, financial records, and encrypted communications. Dante threw a thick, heavy binder onto the table in front of me. "Va Volkov, Victor," it read in stark block letters. "Everything we have is in there," Dante said, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Associates, properties, habits, psychological evaluations from paid sources. It's a mountain of data. I need you to find the needle." I opened the binder. The first page was a photograph of a man in his late 50s with pale, fleshy features, small, piggy eyes, and a cruel set of thin lips. He looked like a man who enjoyed the suffering of others. The file was a catalog of depravity, extortion, human trafficking, brutal enforcement tactics. But I wasn't looking at the crimes. I was looking for the man, the personality behind the violence. Dante and Marco spoke in low, clipped tones, coordinating teams, tracking vehicles, trying to pick up Volkov's trail in the chaos I had created. I tuned them out. I immersed myself in the file, my mind working with a speed and clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer Elena Hayes, the terrified captive. I was Dr. Hayes, the analyst, and this was the most important case of my life. I devoured the information. Volkov was a narcissist, but a specific subtype, a malignant compensatory narcissist. His cruelty wasn't just for profit. It was to fill a deep-seated void of inadequacy. He collected beautiful things, art, cars, people, to project an image of power he didn't truly feel. He was meticulous, but his meticulousness was a symptom of obsessive-compulsive tendencies, not true strategic genius. This meant he would rely on established patterns in moments of crisis. He would retreat to a place that was not just secure, but also psychologically comforting to him, a place that reinforced his sense of superiority. "His properties," I said, not looking up from the file. "He has safe houses, but they're functional, Spartan. He wouldn't take her there. That's for soldiers. He'd take a prize somewhere that reflects its value, somewhere he can admire his acquisition." Dante came to stand behind me, looking over my shoulder. "He has an estate north of the city and a warehouse complex by the docks that he converted into a private gallery for his stolen art." "The estate is too public, too predictable," I reasoned, flipping through photos of the properties. "He knows you'd look there first. The gallery... Tell me about the gallery." "It's his fortress," Dante said, his voice grim. "Reinforced walls, state-of-the-art security. Only a handful of his most trusted men even know its true purpose. It's where he keeps the things he values most. And it's isolated. By the industrial docks," I continued, a cold certainty growing in my gut. "A place where screams wouldn't be heard, a place that smells of decay and salt water. It feeds his sense of drama, of gothic power. He's a cliché, a caricature of a villain from a cheap novel." My eyes scanned a timeline of his past actions, and there's a pattern. 3 times in the past 5 years, when a deal has gone south and he's taken a high-value hostage for leverage, he's used that location. He held a rival's son there in 18, a federal witness in 20. It's his stage. He's taken her to the gallery. Dante stared at me, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "Marco," he snapped, "the dockside gallery. Full assault team. Go." "I'm going with you," I said, closing the binder. It was not a request. Dante's immediate response was a hard, definitive no. "You need me," I insisted, standing to face him. My fear for Chloe was a roaring fire, but my focus was like ice. "You're going in there with guns. You're thinking about extraction. You're not thinking about him. Victor, his ego is his weakness, and it's your only real advantage. When you go in, he'll have Chloe right next to him. One wrong move, one bullet from a nervous guard, and she's gone. You need a distraction. You need to get inside his head, and that is my area of expertise." He stared at me, his jaw working. He was at war with himself, his instinct to protect me, versus the cold, tactical truth of my words. He knew I was right. "Fine," he bit out, the word torn from him. "But you do exactly as I say. You do not move without my command. You are a tool, nothing more." "Is that understood?" "Perfectly," I replied, my voice cold. The ride to the docks was a silent, high-velocity blur. I was wedged in the back of an armored SUV between Dante and Marco, the air thick with the smell of ozone, adrenaline, and metal. Dante handed me a small earpiece. "This is a direct line to me, no one else. I will tell you when to speak and when to be silent." He also handed me something else, a small, heavy pistol. I looked at the gun, then at him. "I'm a psychologist. Tonight you're a survivor," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion but grim purpose. "I don't want you to use it. I want you to have it. There's a difference." I took it, the cold, unfamiliar weight, a terrifying reality in my palm. He showed me the safety. My hand was shaking, but I tucked it into the waistband of my trousers at the small of my back. The warehouse was a monolithic block of decaying brick and rusted steel, crouched at the edge of a dark, oil-slicked pier. Dante's men, a dozen shadows in black tactical gear, melted into the surrounding darkness, securing the perimeter with silent, practiced ease. "He's on the top floor," Marco murmured, pointing to a single, faintly lit window. "Thermal shows 3 heat signatures in that room. Volkov, a guard and a smaller figure, likely the girl." My heart seized. "Chloe." "He'll be expecting a frontal assault," Dante said, his eyes scanning the building. "We're not giving him one." He looked at me. "I need to get you inside his head before we breach. I'm going to open a channel to his security system. He'll be able to hear you." "What do you want me to say?" "Tell him his asset has been compromised," Dante instructed. "Tell him Sarah Jenkins has been taken into my custody. Tell him she's talking. Sow chaos. Make him doubt his own people. Make him focus on you, not the door." Marco handed Dante a tablet. A few keystrokes, and then he nodded. "You're live." I took a breath, closing my eyes, picturing Volkov's smug, cruel face. I wasn't Alana anymore. I was a voice of retribution. "Victor," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, amplified through his own security system. "This is Dr. Hayes. I'm afraid your intelligence network has a leak, a rather significant one. Your informant, Sarah Jenkins. She's singing a beautiful song for my associates right now. Every name, every safe house, every dirty little secret." There was a moment of silence. Then a distorted voice crackled back through Dante's earpiece, which he held so I could hear. "Clever trick, whore, but you're lying." "Am I?" I let a hint of mocking pity enter my tone. "A man like you, so obsessed with control, and you put your trust in a C-list journalist with a gambling problem? That's not smart, Victor. It's desperate. Dante is on his way, but he's not coming for you. He's coming for his property, all of it, starting with your sad little art collection." "Breach in 10, Dante murmured to Marco, his eyes fixed on the window. "You think you can get to me?" Volkov's voice was tight with rage. "I have your sister, you stupid bitch. I have her right here." "I know," I said softly, and this time the emotion was real. "And for that there is no forgiveness." "Go," Dante ordered his men. Explosions rocked the ground floor. Gunfire erupted, a deafening cacophony of violence. Dante grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a fire escape on the side of the building. "We're going up." We scaled the rusted ladder, the sounds of battle raging below us. Marco was a shadow ahead of us, Dante a solid wall behind me. We reached the roof. Marco silently neutralized a guard with the butt of his rifle. They moved to a skylight directly over the gallery. Dante held up a hand, peering down. I looked too. Below us was a vast open room filled with priceless paintings and statues, all lit with dramatic spotlights. In the center of the room, Viktor Volkov stood with his arm wrapped around Chloe's throat, a pistol pressed to her temple. Chloe was sobbing, her face pale with terror. A single hulking guard stood beside them. "They're on the roof!" the guard yelled. Volkov looked up, his piggy eyes finding ours. He smiled, a grotesque slash in his fleshy face. "The happy couple. Come to join the party?" Dante leveled his rifle. "Let her go, Victor." "Not a chance, Moretti. You wanted a war? Here it is." He pressed the gun harder against Chloe's head. This was it, the moment. My mind went cold and clear. "Dante, wait," I whispered into the earpiece. "Let me talk to him. Keep him focused on me." I stood up, stepping into the full light of the gallery, visible through the skylight. "You're right, Victor," I called down, my voice ringing with false confidence. "You've won this round. You have her. You have the leverage." He preened, his ego swelling. "I always win." "But what do you win?" I continued, taking a slow step closer to the edge. "Her? A terrified girl? She's not a prize, Victor. She's just a reminder of the woman you really wanted but couldn't get. The woman who is standing right here, looking down on you." His face contorted with rage. "You?" "Me?" I said. "I'm the one who outthought you. I'm the one who saw through your pathetic little scheme, and I'm the one Dante came for." I glanced at Dante, a silent communication passing between us. I was the bait. Volkov's focus shifted entirely to me. His grip on Chloe loosened fractionally. His gun wavered. It was the opening Dante needed. In a movement so fast it was a blur, Dante fired, not at Volkov. At the massive crystal chandelier hanging directly above him, the bullet shattered the chain. The 2-ton monstrosity of glass and metal crashed downward. The guard looked up, his mouth open in a stupid O. He was crushed instantly. Volkov, reacting with surprising speed, threw Chloe aside and dove out of the way, the chandelier shattering on the marble floor where he'd been standing. "Now!" Dante roared. He and Marco dropped through the shattered skylight, landing like cats amidst the broken glass. I didn't wait. I scrambled back down the fire escape, my heart pounding. I had to get to Chloe. I burst through a side door onto the gallery floor. The room was a maelstrom of violence. Marco was engaged in a brutal firefight with 2 more guards who had emerged from a side room. Dante was advancing on Volkov, who had come up from his dive, his face a mask of pure hate. Chloe was on the floor, scrambling away from the fight, her eyes wide with terror. "Laney!" she screamed. I ran to her, but a figure blocked my path. One of Volkov's men, his face scarred, his eyes dead. He grabbed me, his arm like a steel band around my chest. "Going somewhere," he sneered. Panic seized me. Then I felt the cold, hard weight of the gun against my back. Dante's words echoed in my head. "Tonight, you're a survivor." My movements were clumsy, frantic. I fumbled for the weapon, my fingers closing around the grip. I pulled it free, clicking off the safety just as Dante had shown me. The man holding me laughed. "What are you going to do with that, little girl?" I didn't think. I reacted. I jammed the barrel of the gun into his side and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, the recoil slamming my arm back. The man grunted, a look of shocked surprise on his face. His grip loosened. I twisted away, stumbling backward. He looked down at the blossoming red stain on his shirt, then back at me, his eyes full of disbelief. Then he crumpled to the floor. I stared at the gun in my hand, then at the man I had just shot. A wave of nausea and shock washed over me, but there was no time. Across the room, Dante had cornered Volkov against a statue. They were locked in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Dante was stronger, but Volkov was fighting with the feral desperation of a cornered rat. He pulled a knife, slashing wildly, catching Dante across the arm. Dante grunted in pain but didn't relent. He disarmed Volkov with a sickening crack of bone and slammed him against the statue's pedestal. "This ends now," Dante snarled. "You'll never win, Moretti," Volkov spat, blood trickling from his mouth. "There will always be someone else." "Then I'll kill them too," Dante said, his voice cold as the grave. And with a final brutal movement, he ended the threat of Viktor Volkov, permanently. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. It was over. The gunfire had stopped. The shouting was gone. There was only the sound of our ragged breaths and the faint, distant wail of sirens, likely from Sarah's misguided call. I dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor. I ran to Chloe, who was huddled by a pillar, shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight. "It's okay," I whispered, over and over, rocking her like I had when she was a child. "It's over. You're safe." Dante walked over to us, his face grim, his suit torn, blood dripping from the gash on his arm. Marco was checking the bodies, his expression impassive. Dante knelt in front of me, his whiskey-colored eyes searching my face. He looked at the dead man a few feet away, then back at me. I expected to see judgment, or perhaps satisfaction. Instead, I saw profound, aching sorrow. He reached out, not to me, but to Chloe. "Are you hurt?" he asked her, his voice surprisingly gentle. Chloe just shook her head, burying her face in my shoulder. Dante's gaze returned to me. He saw the shock in my eyes, the tremor in my hands. He saw the woman I had been, warring with the woman I had just become. He reached out and gently wiped a smudge of grime from my cheek with his thumb. "I'm sorry, Alana," he whispered, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the violence. He was sorry for his betrayal, for his failure, for bringing this world crashing down on me. "I'm sorry for all of it." In that moment, surrounded by death and destruction, looking into the eyes of the most dangerous man I had ever met, I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, terrifying, and undeniable connection. We had been through the fire together, and we had both been burned, both been changed. He had seen my capacity for ruthlessness, and I had seen his capacity for remorse. We were no longer captor and captive. We were something else entirely, something equal, something unbreakable. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled, clinical chaos. Marco and his team were ghosts, erasing our presence from the scene with terrifying efficiency. Evidence was wiped, bodies were removed, and within 30 minutes, the warehouse gallery looked less like the site of a massacre and more like it had suffered a tragic, localized earthquake. The authorities, when they finally arrived, would find a scene of destruction, a dead crime lord, and no clear answers. Dante Moretti's name would never be mentioned. He led Chloe and me out a back exit to a waiting car, a different one from the SUV we'd arrived in. Chloe was in a state of shock, wrapped in Dante's suit jacket, her small frame trembling. I guided her into the back seat, my arm firmly around her, whispering reassurances I didn't feel myself. My own hands were shaking, the phantom weight of the pistol still a chilling memory in my palm. I had taken a life. The psychologist in me knew the trauma of that act would surface later, a debt to be paid. But right now, all I felt was a hollow, ringing numbness. Dante slid into the seat beside the driver, his silence filling the car. He had a deep gash on his forearm from Volkov's knife, a wound he ignored with unnerving stoicism. We drove through the sleeping city, a silent, blood-spattered trio returning from a war no one else knew had been fought. Back at the penthouse, the pristine, sterile environment felt like a mockery. Marco, ever present and silent, directed Chloe toward a guest room. Not my room, I noted, but one on the same floor. He had a medical kit ready. While I helped Chloe settle, trying to soothe her ragged sobs, Marco appeared with a sedative from a doctor who was, he stated flatly, on call. Chloe was asleep within minutes, the blessed oblivion a temporary mercy. When I emerged, Dante was standing by the great wall of windows, staring down at the city. He had taken off his ruined jacket and was attempting to clean the wound on his arm with a cloth and a bottle of whiskey from his bar. His movements were stiff, awkward. I walked over, took the bottle and cloth from his hands, and gestured for him to sit on the sofa. He hesitated for a second, then complied, a flicker of surprise in his eyes at my quiet command. I retrieved the medical kit from Marco, my hands moving with a nurse's practicality I didn't know I possessed. "I was pre-med for 2 years before I switched to psychology," I said, my voice quiet in the vast, silent room. It was an explanation he hadn't asked for. I knelt before him, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. It was deeper than I'd thought. It would need stitches. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but I could feel the tension in his arm, the tightly coiled muscles under my fingers. His blood was on my hands, a stark, crimson reality. "I killed a man," I whispered, the words falling into the space between us. It wasn't an accusation or a confession. It was a statement of fact, a line I had crossed. Dante's gaze was fixed on my face. "You survived," he corrected me, his voice a low, gravelly murmur. "You protected your family. There is no sin in that." "In your world, maybe," I countered, my hand starting to stitch the wound with a neatness that surprised me. "This is your world now, Elena," he said. And there was no threat in the words, only a deep, profound sadness. "I'm sorry for that. I tried to keep you from it. I tried to keep you in the cage where you would be safe and clean." "The cage didn't work," I said, tying off the last stitch. "Your control didn't work. You can't protect people by hiding the truth from them. You can't manage them like assets on a balance sheet. That's what I tried to tell you." He reached out his uninjured hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was no longer a claim of ownership, but a question, a plea. "I know," he said, his voice raw with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "My control, it comes from fear, the fear of failing the people I need to protect. The way I failed my mother, the way I almost failed you and your sister. I saw you, this brilliant, fierce, good woman, and all I could think about was how to lock you away from the ugliness of my life. I thought I was protecting you. I was just suffocating you." Tears I didn't know were there began to slide down my cheeks. They were not tears of fear or grief, but of a wrenching, overwhelming, emotional release. He was finally showing me the man behind the mask, the wounded boy inside the monster. "I saw you tonight," he continued, his thumb stroking my cheek, wiping away a tear. "In that warehouse. You were terrified, but you were magnificent. You used your mind like a weapon. You faced down monsters. You became one for a moment to save your sister." He looked at my hands, now clean, but forever stained in my mind. "I brought you into this world, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I will not let you face it alone." He leaned in, his forehead coming to rest against mine. The scent of him, whiskey, blood, and that clean, metallic smell of power filled my senses. "I've known who you were for a year, Elena," he confessed, his voice a broken whisper. "I saw you giving a guest lecture at the university. I had my men compile the dossier that night. I told myself it was for strategic reasons, that you were a person of interest living in territory I controlled. But it was a lie. I was obsessed. I watched you from afar, this bright, beautiful light, and I knew I could never touch you, that I would only ever extinguish you." He pulled back, his whiskey-colored eyes boring into mine, filled with a desperate, self-loathing honesty. "When Mark made his deal with Volkov, I saw my chance. A way to have you under the guise of protecting you. It was selfish. It was monstrous. But I couldn't let him have you. I would have burned the city to the ground before I let a man like that put his hands on you." His confession was a final, devastating blow to the world I had known. He hadn't just stumbled upon me. He had coveted me. He had orchestrated my rescue. The entire foundation of my new reality was built on his obsession, but strangely, In the wake of all the violence and betrayal, this truth felt like the most solid thing I had to hold on to. It was twisted, it was dark, but it was real. "What you protect, you keep," I whispered, echoing his own words back to him. "You are not a possession, Elena," he said fiercely. "You are my partner, my queen, if you'll have me." He looked around the vast, empty penthouse. "This is not a cage. I want it to be our home, our fortress, together." I looked at this impossible, dangerous man, a man who dealt in death, but who looked at me with a worshipful reverence. My old life was gone, burned away in the fire of his world. My old self was gone too, replaced by someone harder, stronger, someone who knew the darkness firsthand. I could mourn that loss, or I could embrace the woman I had become. I leaned in and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was raw, desperate, and possessive. It was the taste of blood and tears, of endings and beginnings. It was the sealing of a pact, a final surrender to a fate I had never chosen but would no longer fight. When we finally broke apart, breathless, I looked into his eyes. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "Our fortress." A year can change everything. A year ago I was a psychologist, a wife, a woman living a life of quiet, respectable desperation. Now I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the city sprawling beneath me like a conquered kingdom, and I barely recognized that woman. The cool night air felt good on my skin. The pearl necklace, a new one, a perfect black pearl this time, was a familiar weight in the hollow of my throat. It was no longer a symbol of ownership, but a reminder. A memento of the night I was reborn in fire and blood. The penthouse was no longer a sterile museum. It was a home. My books were on the shelves, interspersed with Dante's grim volumes of philosophy and military history. A framed photo of Chloe, smiling and happy on her recent graduation day, sat on the mantelpiece. She was thriving, finishing her master's degree abroad, a trip financed by a very generous scholarship I had arranged. She knew a heavily sanitized version of the truth. She knew Dante had saved her, that he was a powerful man who had eliminated a threat. She didn't need to know the details. Her innocence was the one thing I had managed to salvage from the wreckage, and I guarded it as fiercely as Dante guarded his empire. Dante, my husband. We had married 3 months after that night, a quiet ceremony with Marco and a shell-shocked city official as our only witnesses. Our marriage was a partnership forged in the darkest of circumstances, a strange and potent alchemy of obsession, intellect, and shared trauma. He had kept his promise. He treated me not as a possession, but as his equal, his queen. I was his most trusted advisor. My psychological insights now an integral part of the Moretti family's operations. I didn't condone the violence, but I understood its necessity in their world. I helped him navigate the treacherous currents of alliances and betrayals, my mind the scalpel to his sword. I made him better, more strategic, less reliant on brute force. I tempered his darkness with my light. He came to stand behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. He was no longer the impenetrable fortress of a man I had first met. With me, in the sanctuary of our home, he was vulnerable, tender. He had shared the full story of his mother, the nightmares that still haunted him, and I had shared mine. We were two broken halves of a whole, finding solace in each other's jagged edges. "It's quiet tonight," he murmured, his lips brushing my temple. "The quiet is what we fought for," I replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. The criminal underworld was still there, a hungry beast, lurking in the shadows of the city. Threats would always arise. But now we faced them together. We were the apex, the undisputed power. The Moretti name, with my strategic counsel behind it, had become a thing of legend and terror. I placed my hand over his on my stomach, a gentle, protective gesture. "She's quiet tonight, too," I said softly. A low, rumbling sound of pure joy vibrated through his chest. He tightened his hold, his hand covering mine, a silent vow of protection for the new life we had created. A daughter. A princess for our dark kingdom. We were expecting her in the spring. He turned me in his arms to face him, his whiskey-colored eyes, once so cold and hard, now filled with a love so fierce it still sometimes stole my breath away. "I love you, Elena Moretti," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the best part of me." "And you, Dante," I whispered, reaching up to trace the faint scar that remained on his arm, "are the part of me I never knew was missing." My husband had left me at a gas station, a broken woman with nothing. The Mafia boss who pulled up in his place had taken everything else. My name, my freedom, my innocence. But in their place, he had given me a new life, a new purpose, and a love as vast and dangerous as the city at our feet. He had never let go, and the truth was, I had never wanted him to.